A whisper coils through the void. What becomes of creation when its maker casts a shadow darker than the night between stars? Thus begins the chronicle, long buried beneath collapsed constellations. The tale of the first dusk, when the Astral Imperivox shifted and every luminous creed trembled. Across the ruins of empires that mistook themselves for eternal, the question lingers still. In the cold gulf between galaxies, prophets once claimed the Emperor of Radiant Thought would shepherd humanity to ascension. But the prophecy never spoke of the shadow he carried, or how it would one day awaken, hungry, learning the shape of doubt. It was in this moment of awakening that the eternal war began, not with the clash of armies, but with the quiet unmaking of faith itself, like a candle guttering in halls where no breath remains. They say the first sign appeared on Haleth Prime, where the star harvesters found their machines weeping molten light. The heavens above the planet dimmed, as though veiled by a colossal, unseen wing. The priests of the Imperivox declared it a blessing, a prelude to transcendence. Yet beneath their devotion trembled a dread no doctrine could silence. Children dreamt of colossal silhouettes pacing the edges of reality, leaving footprints that thundered through their skulls. As the dreams spread, so too did the silence. Whole cities waking to find their skyward prayers swallowed, their echoes devoured. And somewhere behind that growing void, something vast inhaled, tasting belief like incense. Word of the omen drifted to the throne nebula, where the Emperor's voice once shaped the trajectories of galaxies. His paladins gathered in fractal citadels, chanting the ancient stanzas that bound his light to mortal hope. Yet the Emperor stood unmoving, his form shimmering like a sun seen through deep water. Witnesses insisted his radiance flickered, not dimmed, but fractured, as though something within strained against his own divinity. They believed it was merely the weight of cosmic vigilance. They could not imagine the truth. His shadow, grown sentient across millennia, now strained to answer prayers meant for him alone. Faith bifurcated in real time, and the cosmos felt the tear. The scholars of obsidian observation detected anomalies in the astral ledger, ripples of time, with signatures matching neither known enemy nor natural force. These disturbances echoed ancient warnings etched in the ruins of the Lorn hegemon. Beware the god who forgets his reflection. As the scholars traced the pattern, they uncovered a disquieting symmetry, every ripple aligned with moments of lost human belief, as if disbelief were being harvested. Their data formed a constellation shaped unmistakably like an inverted crown. They presented their findings trembling, for even their hardened logic failed to mute the unspoken conclusion. Humanity's protector was no longer singular. Something equal in magnitude had awakened, wearing his silhouette like a memory. Armadas mobilized under banners of gleaming starlight, engines chanting hymns in frequencies designed to ward off spectral incursion. Admirals spoke of decisive retaliation, yet their voices betrayed the same hollow terror that filled their crews. When fleets entered the obscural rift, a region where light vanished without reason, they encountered visions rather than enemies. Entire battle groups witnessed echoes of themselves drifting across the black ships crewed by pale doubles with empty eyes. These reflections enacted their maneuvers before they were ordered, as though fate itself were being rehearsed by something watching from deeper shadows. The admirals realized too late these were not illusions, but premonitions sculpted by an intelligence that had already accounted for every human motion. On the world of Velaskar, where humanity first communed with the Imperivox, pilgrims gathered by the millions, seeking comfort amid spreading dread. But the sacred monolith that once sang with divine resonance now emitted a low, discordant hum, a message none could translate, but all could feel. Mothers clutched children who screamed at unseen figures stalking the edges of their perception. The priests called for unity, yet their voices cracked as the monolith's vibrations deepened, altering heartbeat, thought, and memory. A pilgrim collapsed, her eyes reflecting not the monolith, but a towering shape eclipsing it entirely. A shape she insisted was the Emperor, though darker, heavier, breathing the cold of forgotten eons. The Emperor's true legions, the celestial phalanx, descended at last, their armor etched with runes, promising invincibility. But as their boots struck sacred ground, the monolith split open like a geode, revealing not crystalline light, but a hollow interior swallowing all radiance. A wind poured from within, carrying whispers in the Emperor's own voice, yet stripped of warmth, intent, or mercy. The legionnaires faltered. For the first time in recorded memory, they felt fear. The wind coiled around them, peeling their courage as though it were bark, leaving their spirits exposed and shaking. A single soldier raised his spear toward the hollow, demanding the entity reveal itself. What stepped forth was shaped like the Emperor, yet its shadow struck the ground before its feet did. Across the cosmic frontier, humanity's greatest weapons, starbreakers, sunspears, psionic forges, ignited in synchronized readiness. But weapon masters found their machines reacting sluggishly, as if the universe itself resisted being bent toward war. Tactical seers reported encountering a presence while scrying the battlefield's future, something that watched back, appraising their efforts with ancient amusement. When they tried to describe it, their minds fractured into contradictory images. A crown of fractures, a halo of void runes, a smile cut from collapsing stars. Even the bravest seers turned away shaking, whispering the same impossible phrase: the Emperor is not alone within himself. On the hidden moon, Sanctum Eridan, archivists opened vaults sealed since the Dawn Accord, retrieving texts forbidden even to the highest priesthood. These tomes spoke of the dual genesis, the moment the Emperor's first thought bifurcated into light and remembrance. The remembrance, unanchored, drifted through the void, feeding on discarded dreams and unspoken fears. The texts warned that if humanity ever doubted the Emperor in great enough numbers, the remembrance would gain form, a perfect anti-reflection born from the fractures of faith. As the archivists read these words, tremors shook the moon, and dust drifted from the ceiling in patterns that spelled a name none dared speak. In the star-sieged metropolis of Orikar Dominion, reality thinned like worn cloth. Streets stretched into impossible angles, and citizens glimpsed towering silhouettes marching silently across the horizon, visible only at the corner of one's vision. Nightmares leaked into daylight, whispers echoing from mirrors, footprints materializing on stone with no source. The government broadcast assurances, yet their messages grew distorted mid-transmission, warped into proclamations delivered in the Emperor's cadence, yet twisted, impatient, yearning. This voice promised salvation through surrender, not faith. People knelt instinctively, but those who did found their shadows pulling away from their bodies, hesitating, as though unsure which master they truly served. The eternal war erupted, not with the thunder of fleets, but with the sudden quieting of every star in the Karthus expanse. A darkness pulsed outward in a perfect sphere, absorbing all song, all movement, all prayer. When light returned moments later, every moon had been branded with the same sigil, an inverted crown scarred into their crust. Humanity watched in collective awe and terror as the symbol pulsed with slow, deliberate rhythm, like the heartbeat of something colossal awakening across dimensions. The Emperor's heralds attempted to nullify it, yet their powers dissipated on contact, consumed by a presence that regarded them with gentle contempt. In the Hall of Celestial Judgment, the Emperor finally spoke. His voice carried the exhaustion of millennia, layered with dread none had imagined he could feel. "My shadow has found its name," he declared, though the name itself remained unspoken. Those in the chamber felt their memories twist as if something ancient pressed its forehead against their minds, searching. The Emperor lifted his hand toward the distant sigils burning across moons and worlds. "It believes it was betrayed," he whispered, sorrow shaping each syllable. "It believes humanity was promised to it." And with those words, the cosmos shuddered like a living thing. As fleets, faiths, and fates spiraled toward inevitable collision, humanity looked to the Emperor for deliverance. Yet even as his light grew, so too did the silhouette beside him, stretching, sharpening, learning the contours of dominion. Witnesses swore they saw it smile. Across the far rim, the inverted crowns began to pulse faster, as if answering a call from a throat not yet fully formed. And in that gathering stillness, in the hush before the first true blow of the eternal war, something small and impossible flickered, a faint, rhythmic tapping from within the hollow monolith on Velaskar, as though someone or something inside was preparing to knock again. From within the hollow monolith, the tapping persisted, faint, deliberate, imponderably patient, as though time itself paused to listen. Pilgrims who once sought solace now fled its presence, yet a handful remained, transfixed by the rhythm seeping into their bones. Among them, a young penitent named Sariel felt the taps aligning with her heartbeat, coaxing half-forgotten memories she swore were not her own. She saw the Emperor in his earliest radiance, but there beside him stood another figure, blurred by shadow, as if deliberately erased from cosmic history. When Sariel tried to speak the vision aloud, her voice fractured into dust. Those near her stepped back, marking her as touched or cursed by something neither holy nor profane, but older than devotion itself. And still the tapping continued, patient as hunger. Across the warfronts, soldiers of the celestial phalanx prepared for battle in vaults filled with incense and cold iron. Yet, even among these unwavering warriors, fractures of faith spread quietly. Commander Elthrin, bearer of the Starot spear, stared at his reflection in the polished surface of his armor and saw the shadow behind him twitch before he moved. His subordinates noticed his hesitation, the brief tremor in his prayers. Rumors whispered that Elthrin once heard the Emperor speak directly within his mind. Now he felt only static, a crackling silence where divine certainty used to live. As he donned his armor, he wondered whether he fought for the Emperor he loved, or for the one now learning to perfect its imitation. In the Cathedra Fortress of Lumentar, high priests convened in chambers drenched in ancient starlight. Debate erupted like a storm. Some claimed the Shadow Double was a test, a crucible meant to refine humanity's allegiance. Others whispered the heresy that the Emperor's radiance had long been waning, and that his rival was merely the truth finally unmasked. Arxer Voriman, whose eyes glowed with the weight of prophecy, presented forbidden scriptures recovered from vaults sealed before memory began. These texts described a division not between good and evil, but between two facets of divinity, one forged from will, the other from consequence. The priests recoiled, some falling to their knees, others grasping for weapons. For the first time in centuries, belief drew blood. Meanwhile, deep within the throne-shrouded nebula, the Emperor stood motionless as tides of distorted light crawled along the walls like hesitant serpents. His attendants bowed, yet sensed the fracture within him widening. From his shadow, subtle motions echoed half a breath too late, like a mimic rehearsing how to exist. The Emperor's gaze drifted toward the distant sigils burning upon moons and worlds, each pulse tugging at his essence. "It remembers what I forgot," he murmured, though none dared ask what that forgetting cost. Those nearest felt the weight of a revelation forming on his lips, but he silenced himself before it emerged, as though speaking the truth would grant his shadow dominion. In the political spires of the Orikar Dominion, senators slashed through rhetoric like duelists. Accusations flew of hidden alliances, unauthorized communications, and heretical sympathies. Chancellor Ethros, once a devout champion of the Imperivox, now privately courted emissaries, claiming the shadow offered a clearer destiny, one unburdened by ancient decrees. Yet in public, he denounced such whispers as blasphemy. When confronted with evidence linking him to subversive factions, he only smiled, eyes reflecting an inverted crown for the briefest, treacherous moment. Some senators saw it and shivered, others pretended not to. Power shifts quietly, like the breath of something waiting beneath the floorboards. At the edge of the obscural rift, scout ship Aura 9 drifted into a silence deeper than death. Navigator Ryan recorded strange harmonics vibrating through the hull, echoes of humanity's collective doubts rendered as sound. The crew heard whispers speaking in familiar voices, but reversed, as though their futures were calling back to them. Ryan alone perceived a message hidden within the layers. Return to the monolith. The knocking is not of this age. When he reported it, the captain accused him of hallucination. Yet, when they attempted to retreat, the stars rearranged themselves into the shape of an inverted crown before dissolving. Ryan felt something watching from the void between those vanishing lines. On Velaskar, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Serial, trembling yet entranced, approached the monolith as others fled in terror. Each step reshaped her memories, her childhood, her vows, even her vision of the Emperor, rearranged like pages in a book rewritten by unseen fingers. She realized the tapping was not asking for release, but recognition. Something within the monolith remembered humanity intimately, painfully, as though it once walked among them. When Serial finally placed her palm upon the cracked surface, the world around her dimmed to grayscale. A single phrase echoed in her skull. "You were meant to see me first." In distant war chambers, strategists analyzed cosmic data streams, only to discover inconsistencies that defied time itself. Recorded battles appeared in archives days before they occurred. Tactical predictions arrived, marked with seals of imperial authority, though no human analyst authored them. These ghost projections always favored strategies that resulted in deeper human losses, but victories for the shadow. When General Hestevar compared them to forbidden prophecy algorithms, he found perfect alignment. The shadow was not predicting humanity's downfall, it was arranging it with surgical precision, and someone high within command was feeding it information only the Emperor should have possessed. Among the broken faithful, despair spawned fanaticism. Cults formed honoring the shadow as the truer manifestation of divinity, the inevitable consequence of a universe that thrived not through light, but through its absence. Their leaders claimed visions of the Emperor kneeling before his twin, begging for understanding. Whether lies or glimpses of something deeper, The cults spread across planets like wildfire. Some were extinguished swiftly. Others simply vanished, leaving behind symbols etched into walls that reacted to neither flame nor time, pulsing faintly like living scars. On the moon, Sanctum Eridan, archivists deciphered the final passages of the dual Genesis texts. The words were written in a script that shifted the moment one tried to read it, but a pattern emerged. The shadow was not created by fear alone. It was born from a promise the Emperor made and then broke. A promise to a being whose existence was erased from celestial record. As they pieced together the truth, a tremor shook the archives, and one archivist suddenly uttered a name not spoken in any tongue known to mankind. The sound of it cracked the lights overhead. The celestial phalanx, preparing for a decisive strike, found their weapons declining activation. The runes inscribed upon their arms flared with opposing energies, one radiant, one voidborn, warring for dominance. Commander Elthrin witnessed his spear bend, not physically, but in possibility, presenting alternate futures. In one, he knelt before the Emperor. In another, before the shadow. In a third, before neither. The spear pulsed violently, and Elthrin dropped it, hearing it whisper, "Your loyalty was chosen for you." He felt something inside him unravel. And then the skies above Velaskar split open. The monolith shattered, not outward, but inward, collapsing into a hole of absolute silence. From within that void gazed an eye shaped like the Emperor's, yet lined with fractures that pulsed like living cracks. Sariel, standing closest, did not scream. She only whispered one sentence that echoed across every listening mind. He was never the first. From the void where the monolith once stood, the fractured eye stared without blinking, its silent gaze pressing against the minds of all who watched. Sariel felt it peel her thoughts apart like petals, exposing truths she was never meant to hold. She staggered, whispering fragments of memories that were not hers, a civilization older than humanity, kneeling before the same eye when the cosmos was barely cooled. The pilgrims fled in panic, yet some turned back, compelled by a yearning they could not name. Above them, the sky rippled like a curtain, revealing silhouettes of titans marching across layers of reality. Their footfalls caused no tremor, yet every heartbeat faltered in rhythm to their steps. The eye dimmed, then brightened again, as if judging the worth of those who remained. Sariel felt herself chosen, but she could not tell whether for salvation or sacrifice. The celestial phalanx marched across burning plains on the world of Thalaxis, its once verdant fields now charred black by rifts in space. Commander Elthrin led them, but every step felt like walking through water made of memory and dread. The soldiers muttered fractured prayers, each syllable sounding less like devotion and more like bargaining. Some swore their armor grew heavier with every doubt they buried. Others claimed to see phantom wings drifting above them, wings shaped like the Emperor's, but patterned with veins of darkness. When the enemy emerged, twisted creatures born of collapsing light, the phalanx fought with desperation. But Elthrin sensed something beneath the battlefield, a giant heartbeat pulsing just beyond perception, echoing the fractured eye on Velaskar. It was as though the universe itself watched them fight, waiting to see which faith survived the slaughter. Within the Throne Nebula Citadel, the Emperor stood before a pool of living starlight. His reflection no longer aligned with his movements. It lagged, shimmered, and occasionally smiled when he did not. The fractured eye's awakening had weakened him, not physically, but in ways the cosmos itself understood. His once limitless certainty was now riddled with gaps, voids where memories should be. He reached into the pool, attempting to recall the name Sariel had spoken, but the waters resisted, solidifying into a mirror of his own face, split down the center by a fault line of shadow. "You hid me," a voice whispered within his skull, neither echo nor thought, but they were always mine to remember. The Emperor resisted speaking, for he knew to answer would give the shadow-rooted voice strength. Yet silence felt like surrender, and even gods were not immune to fear. In the cathedra fortress of Lumentar, Arxer Voraman knelt before ancient relics, now cracked from within. The runes that once glowed with imperial radiance now flickered with dual light, gold at the edges, void black at the core. Priests argued in distant halls, some turning their devotion to the fractured eye, others clinging to the Emperor with fanatic resolve. Voraman alone sought the truth buried between them. As he meditated, his mind drifted into the memory labyrinth carved across his soul by decades of prophecy. There he saw visions, the Emperor forging worlds, the shadow watching from behind his shoulder, humanity rising between them like a candle flame. But deeper still, Voraman saw something that made him gasp, a third presence, neither light nor shadow, drifting in the peripheries of creation, something that had been deliberately omitted from every scripture. And it was waking. The political machine of Orikar Dominion collapsed under its own weight as senators disappeared, leaving behind only scorch marks in the shapes of crowns. Chancellor Ethros locked himself in his private chambers, surrounded by artifacts that hummed with forbidden resonance. His betrayal was no longer a matter of whispers. He wore it openly now, his eyes permanently reflecting the fractured sigil of the inverted crown. As he communed with unseen forces in the walls, the chamber darkened, and a silhouette with the Emperor's outline formed beside him. "The old order dies," it murmured, "but its bones will serve well." Ethros fell to his knees, trembling in awe and terror. Yet even he sensed the presence lacked completeness. It was seeking something lost. When he dared ask what that missing piece was, the silhouette leaned close, its breath cold as starless void. The one he buried. On the fractured moon Sanctum, Eridan archivists found themselves trapped as the ancient vaults sealed shut. The luminous texts they studied had begun rewriting themselves in real time. Lines of prophecy, rearranging with each heartbeat. Archivist Terra called for calm, but then the sigils on the walls lifted from the stone like living ink. The symbols interlinked, forming a spiraling diagram at the center of the chamber. It depicted 3 figures, one radiant, one shadowed, and one veiled in static. The third figure's face was scratched out, not erased, but violently removed by some ancient fury. When the archivists attempted to decipher the surrounding script, the characters condensed, forming a single, devastating line. "This is the one who remembers the first betrayal." Before they could ask what that meant, the lights extinguished, and a third presence entered the room. In the industrial wastelands of Arcalan, a once proud psionic fortress world, psychic storms raged through abandoned cities. Survivors huddled in broken bunkers as the atmosphere itself whispered forbidden truths. In one such shelter, Acolyte Yalan tried to soothe a dying elder. Yet, as the storm intensified, the elder seized his hand and gasped visions into his mind. Humanity kneeling before a being of shifting geometry. The Emperor raging against chains of history, and a shadow growing behind him, not born of darkness, but of rejection. Yalan felt his consciousness pulled outward, showing him a vast tapestry of events, manipulated by an unseen architect, one neither emperor nor shadow. When the storm ended, the elder lay still, but his final words lingered. They fear each other, but they fear it more. On Thalaxis, as battle raged, a rift tore through the sky, revealing a great throne carved from planetary skeletons. A figure sat upon it, immense and blurred, as though existing in multiple versions at once. Elthrin saw it and felt his soul recoil. The creature raised a hand, and the battlefield fell silent. Soldiers froze mid-strike, their bodies trembling as their minds were forced open. Memories spilled from their skulls like light, childhoods, sins, prayers, forgotten loves. The figure sifted through these memories dispassionately, searching for something specific. When it found nothing, it released the army with a roar of disappointment that cracked mountains. As the rift closed, Elthrin realized the figure was neither emperor nor shadow, but it knew them both, and it was hunting. In hidden temples across the fading galaxy, the faithful gathered for what they believed would be the last rites of their dying religion. Candlelight flickered against murals painted with gold that now crumbled into black dust. A monk named Lissa recited the sacred psalms, though her voice shook with doubt. As the congregation chanted, a tear opened above the altar, dripping liquid starlight. From within the tear emerged a chorus of voices, millions speaking as one, each representing a life extinguished in wars older than empires. The voices accused the emperor of forgetting them. They accused the shadow of using them. But their final accusation was reserved for someone unnamed. Lissa felt their anguish fill her lungs. She collapsed, realizing the universe held more ghosts than stars, and they were beginning to reclaim their stories. On Velaskar, Sariel wandered the ruin of the monolith crater, guided by whispers only she could hear. The fractured eye had vanished, leaving behind geometries engraved into the bedrock spirals, branching fractals, and symbols that pulsed beneath her feet. As she traced one symbol, the ground liquefied into memory. She sank into visions of a young emperor, not yet divine, standing before a figure of impossible beauty and terror. The figure offered him dominion over creation in exchange for a single vow that he would remember its name forever. Sariel watched in horror as the emperor accepted the gift, then immediately cast the being into unmaking to ensure no rival would exist. But the vow bound them still. The being's name, lost to history, pulsed within Sariel's skull, begging to be spoken. In the throne nebula, the emperor convulsed as memories long buried erupted from his mind. His attendants fled as his radiance flared and dimmed erratically. Images assaulted him, the vow he broke, the being he betrayed, and the shadow he birthed as consequence. The fractured reflection in the pool solidified into a humanoid form, its expression one of ancient grief. "You feared it," the reflection said, "so you made me, but you cannot hide behind me forever." The emperor reached out, but his hand passed through the reflection, as if through fog. He whispered a name he had denied for ages, and the universe trembled violently, as though the act violated some primordial law. And then, across every world, every ship, every mind, a third voice, older than light, heavier than shadow, spoke a single message into existence. "I remember myself." The cosmos shuddered, and a third crown began to form. The third crown's forming echoed across the galaxy like a death knell stretched infinitely thin. Sariel felt it vibrate through her bones, a lattice of memory and anguish threading itself into her bloodstream. The name she had almost spoken pressed harder against her tongue, as though the universe wished to vent its long-held grievance through her lungs. Around the crater, reality sagged like a wounded veil, colors dulled, wind slowed, and even time seemed reluctant to march forward. She sensed the presence watching her, not with malice, but with a longing so ancient it felt like grief petrified into purpose. The air tightened. Dimly, she wondered if this was what it felt like to stand at the threshold of a god's confession, and whether mortals were ever meant to survive such truths. On Thalaxis, the celestial phalanx limped from the ruins of battle, armor cracked and spirits hollow. Commander Elthrin carried the weight of the battlefield's silence like a brand carved across his heart. Every step left ash where life once thrived, a reminder that honor now cost more than victory could repay. His soldiers followed in quiet formation, their eyes reflecting both the Emperor's fading light and the encroaching shadow, uncertain which deserved their allegiance. Elthrin paused when he saw a child wandering through rubble, clutching a shard of broken sigilstone. The boy looked up at him with eyes too old for his face. "Which one protects us now?" he asked. Elthrin had no answer, because he had begun to suspect the true answer was neither. In the Throne Nebula's sanctum, the Emperor knelt, not in submission, but in exhaustion. The third voice reverberated through his being, reawakening fractures he had buried beneath eons of radiance. He saw now the sin that birthed his divine burden, the vow forsaken in the moment he ascended. His attendants kept their distance, frightened by the shifting halo around him, no longer a single ring of brilliance, but a triptych of warring symbols. He pressed his hands against the starlit floor, feeling creation's pulse beneath his palms. "I will not release you," he whispered, though he did not know whether he spoke to his shadow, or to the forgotten presence whose memory stirred with mounting fury. Either way, the words felt like a lie. In Lumentar, Arc-Servoramon convened a final circle of truth-seekers beneath the cracked mural of Genesis. The Third Crown's whisper twisted through their minds, unspooling centuries of doctrine like thread ripped from an unraveling tapestry. Priests trembled as the truth fought its way into their consciousness. The Imperivox was never singular, never whole. Voraman touched the mural's fractured glyphs, feeling the resonance of a third presence tug at his spirit. "We worshipped a half-truth," he murmured, each syllable thick with mourning. Around him, candles guttered in sudden drafts, their flames bending toward a force unseen. A novice collapsed, screaming that she saw a face behind the cosmos, watching them through a lattice of broken promises. Voraman closed his eyes, knowing their faith would not survive what was coming. On Orikar Dominion, Chancellor Ethros stood atop the Senate spire, watching riots bloom through the city like infected wounds. The Third Crown's whisper had ignited panic and zealotry alike. Citizens splitting into factions that worshipped light, shadow, or the nascent presence lurking beneath both. Ethros clutched a relic that pulsed in his hand, its glow now a tricolored shimmer. He imagined himself a prophet in the new order, a vessel for the rising power. Yet, as he gazed into the storm that swallowed the horizon, he realized the third presence regarded him with the same indifference it held for emperors and beggars alike. He felt suddenly, painfully human. For the first time, his ambition tasted like ash. He wondered whether he had ever been more than a pawn in someone else's vengeance. Deep within Sanctum Eridon's vaults, the archivists huddled as the third presence manifested through shifting patterns of light and geometry. Archivist Terra felt her heartbeat synchronize with the spiraling runes glowing across the floor. The chamber hummed with a frequency that was neither sound nor silence, but the memory of both. The spirals reformed into a colossal outline, a figure neither humanoid nor monstrous, but something primordial. A single point of brilliance marked its core, pulsing like the first heartbeat the universe ever knew. Terra wept as she understood. This was the one the Emperor had betrayed, and the one the shadow feared. When the figure's gaze turned toward her, she felt her consciousness flicker like a candle in a collapsing star. She whispered an apology she did not understand. On Archelon, Yalan ventured alone through the ruins of the psionic citadel, guided by whispers that crawled like frost across his mind. The psychic storms had quieted, leaving behind a landscape scarred with memories not his own. He placed a hand upon a collapsed tower and gasped as visions flooded him. The Emperor forging his empire atop the bones of a forgotten god, the shadow rising in resentment, and humanity placed between them, not as heirs, but as shields. The revelation crushed him. Yet, beneath the devastation, he sensed something stirring. A third will, patient and ancient, reclaiming its rightful throne. As the wind rose, carrying motes of shimmering dust, Yolan felt a whisper coil around his soul. You were shaped from my grief. Across the galaxy's broken frontiers, refugees gathered at the shattered remains of the Veil Gate. Mothers hushed their children with stories once meant to inspire hope, though their voices faltered with every contradiction. A blind elder lifted her face toward the dimming stars and murmured, "We were promised deliverance. We were promised a shepherd." Another survivor answered softly, "Perhaps we were only promised a witness." Their words carried into the stillness, weaving into the collective sorrow of countless worlds. Above them, the stars flickered, not from distance, but from fear. Light itself seemed reluctant to shine in the presence of the Third Crown's impending rise. Elthrin's phalanx established a temporary camp beside a crater carved by reality itself. Soldiers struggled to sleep, haunted by dreams of three thrones suspended in endless void. When Elthron attempted prayer, no voice answered, not even the shadows. He felt hollow, like a blade forged without purpose. As dawn broke, one soldier approached him, trembling. "Commander E, my shadow spoke to me last night." Elthron stiffened. "What did it say?" The soldier swallowed hard. "It said, it does not belong to me anymore." Elthron felt the hair rise along his neck. The Third Crown was claiming ownership of even the smallest reflections. He wondered how long before it claimed the living. Lissa, the monk from the hidden temple, wandered through a dreamscape of memories belonging to the dead. The chorus of lost souls guided her through towering structures, woven from starlight and sorrow. She moved as if in a trance, feeling the weight of creation's first fracture pressing against her chest. The souls revealed glimpses of the primordial being, the one forgotten, the one erased, the one who now remembered itself. Lisa realized the universe had never been a battlefield between two forces, but a prison designed to contain a third. When she awoke beside the temple ruins, the sky above her pulsed with tri-layered light, and her tears tasted like stardust. On Velaskar, Sariel approached the spirals carved into stone, now glowing with a brilliance that seemed to breathe. Each symbol hummed in resonance with the Third Crown forming across the stars. She felt the hidden name pulsing beneath her ribs, ready to be born through her voice. The air thinned around her, as though creation itself leaned closer to listen. She understood that the Emperor's betrayal had not merely created a shadow, it had awakened a wounded god, one who now sought its rightful memory, its rightful throne. She inhaled, prepared to speak, but the moment the name reached her lips, the ground beneath her split open, revealing a colossal shape rising from the abyss. And across the cosmos, every crown, radiant, shadowed, and forming, trembled, because the forgotten god was no longer remembering. it was arriving. The stars convulsed as the wound in reality widened, its ragged edges glowing like the torn flesh of a dying god. And from its depths came the scream that every prophet across the ages had tried to forget. The armies braced beneath the shuddering heavens. Even the war engines paused, their cores thrumming with old fear. Through drifting ash, Seraphil strode, his once radiant wings reduced to scorched geometry, each feather a cracked shard of impossible light. He raised his broken spear to ward the rift, whispering the Emperor's oldest name, not in devotion, but in accusation, as the sky fell open in a cataract of divine fire that swallowed soldiers and titans alike. Those who survived felt their faith cleave. For the first time since the first dawn, they wondered whether they had ever been fighting for salvation at all, or merely delaying the inevitable collapse of creation's first lie. Smoke washed across the ruins like a mourning shroud as General Elira rose from beneath the bodies of her cohort, blood dripping in patient intervals from her shattered vambrace. She gazed upon the monolithic citadel ahead, the sanctum of last light, now cracked with lines of molten gold, as though something enormous hammered from within. She felt the echo of the Emperor's shadow, that vast consciousness once sworn to protect humanity, now feral and vast as a collapsing star. Yet she marched, whispering the names of the fallen as penance. Each step was heavier than the last, for with every footfall came the truth. The orders she carried in her armor-sealed codex would doom millions if fulfilled, yet disobedience would doom billions more. Her tears steamed as they hit the burning ground. The war had stolen every mercy but the cruelty of choice. In the sanctum's inner cloister, the surviving priests chanted in trembling unison, their voices cracked, their liturgy unraveling as the cosmos shifted. High Oracle Venos pressed his trembling hand against the ancient orrery of fate, watching the constellation lines flicker and revolt. The Emperor's star, once steady and brilliant, frayed into a spiraling gyre of shadows. With every rotation of the orrery, the universe seemed to pulse with a heartbeat not its own, deeper, older, disdainful of prayer. Acolytes fell to their knees as visions flooded them, humanity burning in a dozen futures, dying in a dozen different ways, each death marked by the same impossible silhouette. Venos whispered that the shadow had reclaimed its name, the name struck from scripture 10 millennia ago. The others begged him not to speak it, yet he did, a single forbidden word that caused the chamber's lights to gutter and the last surviving Seraphashus to weep molten iron. On the scorched plateaus beyond the sanctum, twin legions collided with the fury of dying worlds. The astral phalanx, loyal to the Emperor's original covenant, fought in eerie silence, their minds linked by the chorus of discipline. The obsidian remnant, traitors, zealots, truth-seekers, depending on who told the tale, unleashed weapons forged in secret for centuries. The clash birthed storms, psychic shockwaves, cracked mountains, and the air filled with the metallic taste of unraveling oaths. Amid the carnage, Captain Ragos paused as a vision seized him, a battlefield of the future, where both sides lay rotted to dust, while the Emperor's shadow stood alone, triumphant not through strength, but through abandonment. When the vision faded, he found his blade embedded in the chest of a kneeling enemy who had not resisted a soldier crying in gratitude for release. Ragos staggered, realizing the war had begun to devour meaning itself. In the deep cryptic caves, hidden far beneath the sanctum, scholar Ariane stepped through rivers of dust toward the forbidden chamber sealed since before recorded time. Her hands shook not from fear but recognition. She had dreamt this place for decades without understanding why. The sigils etched into the door pulsed with her heartbeat, as if awaiting her alone. She opened the vault, and light spilled forth, not bright but ancient, a glow that carried the memory of the universe's first breath. Within lay tablets forged from crystallized void, each inscribed with impossible histories. As she read, her pulse faltered. The Emperor had not created humanity. Humanity had created him, born from collective fear in the age before stars. A god forged of desperation, shaped by billions of minds, until he became real enough to bind creation. She sank to her knees as truth crushed her. The Emperor's shadow had turned not on humanity, but on its own origin, on the warship Tyrant's Mercy, hovering above the burning world. Admiral Corrin watched the unfolding devastation through a viewing prism cracked by earlier bombardments. His crew whispered mutinous prayers behind him, fragments of half-remembered scripture. The ship's astropath screamed in her cell as distant minds wailed against her own, carrying warnings of betrayal from allies who had been loyal hours ago. Corrin's hands twitched above the bombardment runes. A single press could glass the sanctum and end the Shadow's ascension, or it could annihilate the only beings left who understood what truly threatened them. When the Shadow's voice whispered into the ship, soft as velvet and cold as the void, Corrin dropped to one knee against his will. It offered him survival. It offered him purpose. It offered the truth he had begged for since boyhood. When the whisper faded, the Admiral rose, but not as the same man. Far below, in the drowned catacombs, where the sanctum's dead were once entombed, the spirits of ancestors stirred. Echo-monks, their bodies, long decayed, but their minds preserved in memory vaults, awoke to the clamor of a destiny rupturing. They flickered into spectral forms, walking hallways that no longer remembered them. One drifted near the surface battlefield, witnessing her 1,000 times removed descendant falling, bloodied but unbroken. She whispered courage into his ear, though her voice could not cross the veil. The catacombs trembled as the Shadow's presence spread, pulling at the dead like a tide dragging broken ships to sea. The ancestors resisted, not out of loyalty to the Emperor, but to humanity itself. Their collective defiance formed a thin shield of memory around the sanctum, fragile, trembling, buying the living only moments more to uncover the truth or perish before uttering it. The sky above ruptured once more as the Shadow condensed into a towering form of shifting geometry, a silhouette that seemed carved from the negative space between stars. Seraphil, wings burning with more wounds than light, confronted it atop the citadel's highest spire. His voice, once a hymn of radiance, cracked like a dying flame. He demanded to know why the being they had once served had forsaken the covenant. The Shadow answered not in words, but in a vision. Seraphil saw the Emperor's millennia of hidden suffering, forced to maintain reality through brutal will, feeding on worship because without it he would collapse into the nothingness that had birthed him. The Shadow was simply his other half, the burden, the rage, the truth. Seraphil dropped his spear, horrified that divinity itself had been born from fear, sustained by need, and fractured by shame. He whispered, "Then none of us were ever free." General Illyra reached the spire's base in time to see the Shadow extend a hand toward Seraphil, not to strike, but to offer reunion. She screamed a warning, too late. The Seraph hesitated, torn between despair and the promise of release from millennia of contradictions. Illyra fired her last plasma round, the shot tearing through the Shadow's arm but reforming instantly. Yet the act broke the moment. Seraphil recoiled, suddenly choosing life, or at least choosing humanity over oblivion. The shadow's shriek tore open the clouds, twisting the battlefield into a cyclone of screaming souls. Illyra collapsed, her bones vibrating as ancient energies coursed through the spire. Above her, Seraphil rose, wings blazing anew with defiant fury. He reached for his spear, ready to fight again, but the weapon dissolved into dust, as though the universe itself refused to let the battle continue unchanged. Scholar Ariane burst into the spire's summit chamber, tablets clutched to her chest, shouting the truth she had uncovered. Her voice quavered as she declared that humanity was not merely the Emperor's creation, it was his architect, his designer, his prison. The soldiers, priests, and surviving seraphs recoiled. Some wept, some cursed, some laughed in despair. The shadow froze, its swirling forms tightening into a single coherent shape, something dangerously like grief. Arian raised the tablets toward Seraphil, urging him to read, to understand, to break the cycle of worship and betrayal. But the moment the seraph touched them, the runes flared with catastrophic brilliance. The knowledge they contained surged into him, unraveling millennia of devotion. Seraphil screamed, not in agony but revelation, as his wings burst into celestial fire that lit the entire battlefield. The shadow stepped back, afraid. Across the battlefield, the warring legions faltered as the sky turned white gold. Soldiers dropped weapons, blinded by the radiance pouring from the spire. In the blinding light, they saw visions tailored to each soul. Some glimpsed redemption, others damnation, others peace in forms they'd never dared imagine. Ragos saw a future where humanity rose without gods, and a future where it perished the moment belief died. Both visions were equally beautiful and equally horrifying. The obsidian remnant halted their assault. The astral phalanx lowered their shields. The war paused, not by truce, but by awe. For a heartbeat, the galaxy tasted a different destiny, one in which choice outweighed prophecy, but only for a heartbeat. As the light dimmed, screams erupted. Soldiers tore off helmets, convulsing as fragments of forbidden truth carved themselves into their minds. The battlefield dissolved into trembling silence, awaiting a voice to decide its fate. Then, in that trembling quiet, Seraphil stepped from the fading radiance, changed. His wings were not wings now, but vast fractal lattice of living light. His eyes no longer reflected the Emperor's will, but the totality of the truth he had absorbed. Even the shadow recoiled as he approached. Illyra whispered his name, but the seraph did not look at her. He gazed at the universe as though seeing its skeleton for the first time. He spoke a single sentence, soft and irrevocable, and the air around him crystallized with raw possibility. The statement was neither rebellion nor devotion. It was something new, something the cosmos had never permitted. The shadow howled in terror. The priests collapsed. The soldiers wept. Even the ancestors flickered violently. Seraphil raised a hand toward the heavens, and creation itself seemed to bend, trembling, waiting for his next breath. And in that breath, that impossible stillness, the entire galaxy felt it. The Emperor had awakened, but he did not speak. He remembered. The Emperor awakened in silence, a silence so vast it seemed to press against the bones of the galaxy. And in that suffocating hush, the armies below felt their hearts falter. Seraphil knelt, wings dimming to a trembling shimmer, as if the weight of divinity's gaze hollowed him from within. The shadow dissolved around him, like smoke abandoning a dying flame. General Illyra approached slowly, each step echoing through the spire, as though the stone itself mourned. The Emperor's presence was neither light nor darkness, only memory, distilled and unbound. Humanity saw in him not a savior nor tyrant, but the reflection of its own ancient fear. As his awareness rippled outward, stars flickered, and for a moment, all creation seemed to exhale. Then, as quietly as dawn, turning away from night, the Emperor withdrew into stillness, leaving the universe trembling in the wake of what he chose not to say. When the radiance faded, only smoke and drifting embers remained above the sanctum. The battlefield, once a storm of clashing wills, settled into a landscape of broken armor and fallen banners whose colors bled into ash. Captain Ragos rose amid the ruin, clutching his helm against a trembling hand. His visions still lingered, carved like scars into the back of his mind. The choice between futures, divine or human, now felt less like a divergence and more like a fading horizon. The corpses around him, both ally and enemy, seemed to whisper the same question. Was any victory worth this cost? Ragos moved through the silent aftermath, feeling the absence of purpose settle heavily upon him. Without orders, without prophecy, without the crutch of destiny, he found himself confronting a void greater than any battlefield, the void of choosing a path no god had shaped. High Oracle Venos descended the shattered steps of the sanctum, robes torn, staff cracked, his eyes dulled by truths he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The orrery had stopped spinning, its constellation lines frozen mid-collapse, reflecting an unmade future. He stared upon it with something like awe and something like grief. The Emperor's stillness above had severed the certainty around which their faith had orbited. Now, the galaxy felt untethered, drifting like an abandoned prayer through the dark. The surviving priests whispered fractured hymns, trying to assemble meaning from the ruins of doctrine. But Venos silenced them with a trembling gesture. "Faith does not die," he murmured. "It changes shape." He looked out across the broken star fields and wondered if belief itself had been humanity's greatest battle and greatest wound. Then he asked the quiet, lingering question, if gods arise from fear, what will be born from our sorrow? Scholar Ariane remained inside the inner vault, seated among tablets, dimming like cooling embers. She no longer wept. Her tears had run dry hours ago. The truth she uncovered, humanity, the architect of its god, now felt less like revelation and more like an epitaph etched upon the bones of civilization. She watched the runes lose their fire as though choosing to forget themselves. Her voice echoed in the hollow chamber as she whispered the histories aloud, hoping someone, someday, would hear. The sanctum trembled faintly, settling into its ruin as if exhausted by millennia of secrets. Ariane pressed her palm to the oldest tablet, feeling its faint warmth, a pulse of the universe's earliest breath. "We built him," she said softly, "and we broke him." The vault offered no answer. Only the dust stirred, drifting like the remnants of stories too heavy to carry forward. In orbit above the scarred world, the warship Tyrant's Mercy drifted without command. Admiral Corrin stood alone on the bridge, helm at his feet, staring through the cracked viewing prism as faint light curled around the planet's wounded surface. The shadow's whisper no longer hummed behind his thoughts. What remained was a hollow ache where purpose once spiraled like a star's core. He recalled the promise it had offered, survival, meaning absolution, and felt the sting of its absence like a phantom limb. Below, fires sputtered into silence. Above, constellations rearranged themselves with unsettling slowness, as if the heavens reconsidered their architecture. Corrin exhaled and whispered a vow to no one, to everyone, to the void itself. Humanity would need to learn how to stand unguided. Yet he wondered, Can a species built on worship endure when the heavens go quiet? The stars refused him even a flicker in reply. Among the catacombs, the ancestors' spectral forms dimmed as the Emperor's stillness settled across the realms of the dead. Their memories, once vibrant echoes of lives long past, now flickered like candle wicks in a collapsing temple. One by one, they drifted back into their vaults, returning to slumber, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Yet a few lingered, watching the living above struggle beneath the burden of truth. These spirits whispered gentle farewells into the cracks of the world, hoping their descendants might hear them in dreams or breathless moments of contemplation. The last ancestor, her form barely holding shape, reached toward the surface before dissolving. In her final shimmer, she wondered whether remembrance was a chain or a blessing, whether humanity should cling to its ancient wounds or release them into the uncharted dark. Her fading sigh echoed softly, "Do not forget, but do not repeat." Seraphil stood at the edge of the spire, wings dimmed to a quiet lattice of muted starlight. The transformation still pulsed through him, reshaping his purpose with every breath. He no longer felt the Emperor's command threading through his being. He no longer felt the shadow's hunger tugging at the corners of his soul. For the first time in eternity, he felt utterly alone and utterly free. The wind brushed past him like the touch of a forgotten god, and he allowed his wings to unfold slowly, reverently. Below, the survivors gathered, staring upward, waiting for guidance he could no longer offer. Seraphil lowered his gaze, meeting their hope with sorrow. "Your future is yours now," he whispered, though whether they heard or merely sensed the weight of his tone, he could not know. When he finally leaped from the spire, the sky held him with unsettling gentleness. General Illyra walked through the ruins, her armor scorched, her codex cracked, her oath heavy as the lost empire itself. She carried no banner now, only the tired resolve of someone who had seen truth unmasked and still chose to stand. Each soldier she passed lowered their eyes, not out of fear, but in recognition of the cost she bore. The war was over, but the aftermath loomed larger than any battlefield. She reached a shattered statue of the Emperor, its face cleaved clean away. With care, she placed her gauntlet on the fractured stone. "We believed you," she murmured, "and still, we endure." The wind carried her words into the rubble, scattering them like seeds across a world, learning to breathe again. Somewhere deep inside, she wondered what humanity might become without a divine hand shaping its destiny, and whether it would be better or far worse. A lone remembrancer, soot-streaked and limping, wandered the sanctum's outer courtyard, recording what fragments of history remained unburned. His chronicle slate flickered with damaged glyphs, but he whispered the words anyway, fearing silence more than error. He captured faces, ruins, echoes of hymns half sung, symbols half destroyed. His voice trembled as he recounted the final awakening, the quiet withdrawal, the shattering of certainty. Around him lay scrolls charred into curls of black petals, statues dissolved into pale dust, and the metallic scent of a war that had outlived its reasons. He paused beneath a collapsed archway, gazing at the distant figure of Seraphil soaring through the dim sky. "This is the twilight of an age," he whispered. "But twilight is not an ending, unless we choose to forget the dawn." His words faded into the cold air, lingering like the last note of a dying hymn. The battlefield became a memorial of silence. No songs of victory rose, no triumph etched itself into stone. Instead, the surviving soldiers gathered beneath the dimming stars, lighting small lanterns whose flames wavered like fragile memories. The lanterns drifted upward, dozens of tiny embers rising against the vast canvas of night, marking each name, each soul, each story lost. Ragos stood among them, helmet removed, eyes following the floating lights as they ascended. For the first time in his life, he prayed, not to a god, not to an emperor, but to the unknown future that stretched before humanity like an uncharted nebula. Around him, soft murmurs wove together, forming a new kind of liturgy, a prayer for forgiveness, for direction, for the courage to face a universe without the certainty of divine intervention. When the last lantern vanished into the sky, the silence felt holy. Atop the sanctum's final intact tower, Venos climbed alone, carrying the broken staff that once symbolized all faith. He looked upon the world, upon the armies, upon the twilight-drenched horizon that trembled with fires finally dying. The Emperor's presence remained faint, distant, unreadable, like a dream slipping through waking fingers. Venos raised the staff, then let it fall, watching it shatter on the stones below. "We worshipped certainty," he said into the wind. But certainty was the first illusion. The sky offered no rebuttal. In the stillness, he understood something profound and devastating. Faith would not vanish, but it would change, as all things must. And perhaps that was the truest test of humanity, not obedience, but transformation. Venos closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and allowed the question to settle into the ruins. If gods are born from us, what gods will we birth next? In the fading light of that final day, as the fires dimmed and the stars emerged like distant ancient witnesses, the remembrancer set down his chronicle slate. He gazed upon the ruined sanctum, the broken armies, the lone figure of Seraphil vanishing into the heavens. He felt the weight of the age pressing upon him, the wars fought, the truths uncovered, the gods unmade, the futures unwritten. And he understood that stories were all that remained when empires fell silent. With trembling hands, he began to carve the final lines into the slate, a testament to endurance, to suffering, to the fragile brilliance of beings who dared to reach beyond their own fear. His voice cracked as he spoke the closing words of the chronicle. Then, turning to the unseen audience across time and distance, he whispered, "Stand witness with me. Like the tale, subscribe to the chronicle, share the memory, and let your voice join the echoes. The story endures only if you do."